Okay, so today I'm really excited to share a one of the four major deserts in the United States that I frequent quite often. I've been visiting the Sonoran Desert, particularly Anza-Borrego State Park in Southern California now consecutively since 2020. So I've I'm just glad to be able to share some of what I've learned in this unique ecosystem. Obviously, this isn't related directly to Oregon flora, but I think as Oregon botanists and people that just enjoy learning about plants, this is a place where you can drive to and get to fairly, I should say, it's a 2 day drive, but once you get there, there's quite a bit of available camping, and it's pretty much a free state park. In fact, it's California's largest state park, and it's the westernmost edge of the Sonoran Desert. So when I first found Anza-Borrego, I was looking for the warmest place I could go without leaving the country and I could drive to. And it's just, if you look on this map, you've got the Chihuahua Desert to the east and the Mojave to the north and the Sonoran Desert right there in between both. And both the Chihuahuan and especially the Mojave Desert is usually quite colder, and the plants adapt to those colder climates too. So Anza-Borrego is just east of San Diego. I want to say it's like 70, 80 miles from the ocean. So that really regulates and keeps the night temperatures warm. But it does get very warm there in the summertime, obviously. I've only visited in the winter months where the daytime temperatures usually hover around 60 to 70 degrees, and the nighttime temperatures stay just right around freezing. It depends on the year. Some years it can stay much warmer. I mostly go on December and January and February. It's about a 13-hour drive to get there, 12 hours, 13 hours down the interstate. But it's well worth the drive once you get there. So, and it's a kind of a standalone. I lived in southern Arizona for 4 years, and obviously the Sonoran Desert was flagship kind of symbol uh, was the saguaro cactus, and they just don't grow that far to the west. So there's no saguaros in this park, and and so there's some some interesting nuances for the western Sonoran Desert. Okay. All right. So a few groups that what I really like about the Anza-Borrego State Park is it's very well supported by many volunteer nonprofit organizations, the Anza-Borrego Foundation and the Anza-Borrego Desert Natural History Association. They put out weekly educational events to the public during the winter months. So if you find yourself in the park in the middle of the winter months, you can oftentimes almost every day go out and do a plant walk or stargazing or something to do with the wildlife in the area. It's usually led either by a botanist or a retired professional. But these are great foundations to support. And they also put out some great monthly publications that have to do with a lot of the research that goes on inside the park itself. So, what I really also like about the park is that it's mostly dispersed camping. So it takes roughly about 3, 4 hours to just drive from the very eastern edge of the park, on the edge of the Salton Sea, all the way to the western side of the park that goes up into the mountains above San Diego. And it is what I really like about Anza-Borrego is there's no motorized vehicles, there's no you can't shoot guns there. It's just meant for hiking and people to enjoy nature. And you really feel that when you get inside this park. It is so quiet and peaceful and dispersed that you really find a lot of time to just, it's very quiet there and very peaceful. And of course, the protection of the native biodiversity, especially the flora, is very well done there as well. If you can have campfires, obviously in the winter time if they're out of fire season, but it has to be in a closed container. You can't have fires right on the ground. So they do a really good job of limiting human disturbance when you're in the park, and it shows when you get there. And then there is just an enormous amount of hiking. I brought one of my books here from a local author that just started putting out a series of day hikes that now I think the three series alone is equivalent to 300 day hikes that you can do inside the park alone. So no shortage of places to explore once you get inside the park. This is my son when we first on our first trip down in 2020. So slot canyons, a lot of rock climbing, which I don't do, and the PCT also starts on the southern end of the park, right outside the park, and the Pacific Crest Trail actually goes right through Anza-Borrego. Okay, so I think really what most people think of when they think of deserts is pretty harsh environment with lots of prickly plants and very sparse vegetation. But I think as we get into this presentation, I can share a little bit more about just the different plants and the diversity, and actually um, just how many just how lush the desert is once you get into these areas. From afar it doesn't look like much or even above when you're looking down. And so I'll start with a group of plants that are pretty common. Like I said, uh, you don't have the saguaro cactus, but you do have a lot of choyas, cactus, a lot of barrel cacti. And so the choyas are very common there. This is a pencil choya. Obviously, it's easy to identify because of its width. It's a very thin cholla plant. The cacti that are all the choyas really bloom in the months of around April and May. So oftentimes when I go there in the winter, you can find flower buds, but it's really later into March, April, into early May that you're going to see a lot of your desert blooms. One key factor of this one as well, besides obviously its narrow girth, is the yellow-tipped thorns. And yeah, I think one thing that I think of when plants and adaptation is you can kind of see what looks to be scales on the actual stem tissue of the plant, and a lot of that is so the plant can have room to expand. So you can see kind of those wrinkles in at the base of the stem inside there. So when it does soak up water, it can, think about filling a water balloon, and then it gets to a point where, the pressure becomes too much against the walls of the cell walls and could burst. So the kind of these wrinkled stem tissue really help it expand and contract between times of drought and when rains do fall. So here's another nice picture of that up close of the pencil choyas. These typically grow in very dry lowland environments, but this one can also grow up to elevation. The elevation goes from sea level almost at the bottom of the park all the way up to, I think, around 5,500 at the tops of the peaks in the park. So this pencil choya can be found pretty much at all elevations. This is the teddy bear choya. It's fairly easy to distinguish against the pencil choya because of its teddy bear kind of look. It's got multiple arms and usually really densely spined, so it almost looks like cottony in a appearance from afar. And it typically just grows very tall. It usually can get upwards of about 4 to 5 feet tall, and it often just grows taller than wider. It also often forms colonies, and so you can kind of see here is a typical what happens to the choyas is they actually break off and they mostly just propagate clonally through the stems that fall off and land in the soil. So I will mention that if you decide to bring a dog, I wouldn't recommend it. There's no dogs allowed on any of the trails in the park. You can bring your dog camping with you and you can walk down the roads, but you can't take them on the trails. And the other reason is because of the choyas. They mostly shed their stems at the top, and these are just nasty for dogs. I mean, it's almost impossible to keep your dog from stepping on one of these when you're out there with them. So, um, okay. This is another species of cholla. This is a silver cholla, and it's again, all these are really important nesting sites. They're very dense, and oftentimes are found. You'll find bird nests inside these chollas inside the park, nest using them for nesting sites. They're very well protected, obviously, with these spines. So. Another common one is the beaver tail cactus. It's the only cacti in the park that actually doesn't have spines. They have what's called glochids, and up close they're just little fibrous. They're almost like fiberglass hairs, and to me they're almost as more worse than getting hit by a spine on your finger. Although that could be bad if it's deep. But these glochids are just really hard to remove if you get them into your finger or into your hand. There's literally, uh, you know, probably 50 to 100 of them on each bundle. So it's a lot of time picking them out once you get them into your hand. And all these cactus, of course, produce fruit. And the chollas produce a yellow fruit, and this one has a red fruit. These were all really important food sources for Native Americans that lived in this area. Um, this is also one of the most widespread plants in the park. This is called creosote, and it's Laria tridentata. It's actually the most widespread shrub throughout Anza-Borrego, and it's actually the most widespread shrub in the desert regions of North America. It's very, and because it can handle just extremely dry conditions. It can go for up to 3 years with just a few drops of water. So it is something that is actually expanding its range, especially the Sonoran Desert into Arizona and into the drier areas. So when you see creosote, it's actually got its own ecosystem. That it's a dominant shrub, and it's usually inhibiting the most driest areas of the park. So when you come across the creosote bushes that are all growing in a large population, it usually indicates very dry areas of the park. But it is one of my favorite plants. It it actually grows clonally as well. I can probably show you that in the next one slide here. So you can kind of see there the two shrubs growing next to each other. Those are very much likely identical genetically. And actually, even if you look out into the distance, most of the plants that are growing around it are also likely clones of the same plants. Um, Actually, the largest species I believe in the world is actually the oldest species in the world. I'm sorry, is 11,000 years old. Is a creosote clone that is growing in the Mojave Desert, Nevada. It's called the king clone, and it's been radiometrically dated, I believe, at 11,000 years old. So this plant just continues to grow by cloning itself over and over again. I doubt the mother plant is still alive, but it it's still living from a long time ago. Um,
Yeah, is that by a rhizome or how does it?
it spreads by rhizomes, and it'll shoot up when you're around the base of it. You'll find these little tiny creosotes that are just, the size of a baseball coming up all around there. So it's rhizomes. People think of maybe mistakenly that most desert plants are deeply rooted, but it's actually opposite is true. Adaptation to limited rainfall, at least in the Sonoran Desert, is to cast shallow roots very wide. That way, any water that comes into their area, they can actually absorb that into the root system. So a lot of these plants that we're looking at today, especially the shrubs and the cactus, oftentimes are very shallow rooted, but they can expand themselves out very far. So this one obviously has a really nice smell. I don't want to step away from the camera, but if this is my favorite scent, of course, rock salt, it's just such a nice smell. And it's yeah, that it gets the name creosote because of creosote oil, which is a wood preservative that actually comes from coal tar, but it's It just has a really pleasant smell, but it's obviously not coal, uh, and it's very safe. But it's one of the nice smells when it rains in the desert. The entire desert just smells like creosote, and uh, and you can kind of see it's got like a glossy sheen to it. It exudes a really strong resin, and that's very likely due to anti-herbivory. A lot of these desert plants are very exposed out there, so they're kind of just at the whim of any animal. When I mean animals, herbivory could be there's desert mule deer, there's bighorn sheep in Anza-Borrego, but they are the only animal that's been known to eat this plant are jackrabbits in times of really dire circumstances. So I was doing a little bit of research on this, and actually, I think back in the 1950s and 60s, they imported camels into the Arizona Sonoran Desert to see if they'd work as pack animals. And the camels actually ate the creosote. That was one of their favorite plants. So there could be some tie to evolutionary why they produce this. Back in the day, they might have lived, alongside camels, but there really isn't any animals that eat it. One fascinating thing that I always find is I just like the way that it kind of self mulches itself. Those are all just the leaves and the hairs from the seed pods. So and it each plant has its perfect little mulch around the base of it, and it's so I just have to assume that's a natural way to also um, preserve water. Oh, this is jojoba. I wish I had more pictures of this, but jojoba is another uh, common shrub in the Anza-Borrego desert that you find growing. It's evergreen shrub as well. It's dioecious, so it has female and male plants that are separate. But the females produce a fruit that produces a really fragrant oil. Um, the oil is worth a lot of money because it actually retains viscosity at really high temperatures. So in the late 1900s, it replaced sperm whale oil for high-speed machinery. So a much more sustainable source for a high-speed machinery oil source from jojoba.
Well, you can help you the PowerPoint stop sharing.
Okay.
Yes. So we were in the park one time and some man and his son come up to us and they said, "Do you have any duct tape?" My son has glaucoma on his fingers and they pull it off with duct tape. I use duct tape. Anybody else know? So taking out those kind of bitty things, really hard. Duct tape, take it.
Yeah, it gets your other hand and you just keep spreading.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I remember the duct.
I always carry a comb too.
Tape is helpful for spines, but glaucoma.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And forceps, bring your forceps.
So we're going to keep moving on. So the jojoba, I wish I had a better picture, but oftentimes the leaves are upturned and slightly curled, and it is a fairly distinctive evergreen. I don't know, it reminds me maybe of our silk tassel or evergreen silk tassel when you're out in the bottom of the desert. And silk tassels do grow in Southern California at the higher elevations, but down in the hot places, if you see something that looks like a evergreen silk tassel, it's likely jojoba. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. Um, oh boy. Oh, there we go. All right, another distinctive plant in the park is the desert agave desert eye. It's obviously known for its remarkable flowering stalks, over 10 feet tall, up to 12 feet tall, up to 6 foot. So these will bloom usually starting in December and go all the way into April, May. So it's just one stalk per rosette, and it I want to say I recall that it takes about somewhere between 20 and 30 years before it'll actually bloom. But when it does, it's just spectacular. Um, and then the plant dies. It does produce offshoots, off the main plant that'll continue to grow, and it puts out copious amounts of seed as well. This is a very important native seed food source. The inner leaves and the heart, of course. The agave was used as almost like pretty much a source of starch. The flower stalks were eaten, the seeds and the fruit, and fiber was made from the leaves as well. So it's got a really interesting association with a lot of pollinators, but especially bats are known. There's some species of agave that grow in the Sonoran Desert that will have a specific association with bats that come up from Central America just to pollinate this plant. So this is a really spectacular plant when it's blooming. And of course, a basic way to learn shrubs in the desert, or trees and shrubs are oftentimes by their spines. So, I guess, sometimes if you're first starting to learn plants in the desert, you might be looking at plants. Is it a yucca? Is it an agave? Well, agave has the spines along the leaf margins, and yucca is entire, it doesn't have spines along its margin. It just is both are very sharp at the tips, but the agave has spines along its margin. This is not inside the park. This is north of the park in the Mojave National Preserve. This is the Mojave yucca. I just want to use it as an example where you can see the leaf margins don't have spines. One thing they do is they oftentimes the fiber peels from the leaf margin on the yuccas, so it's another good way to start to identify between yuccas and agaves. Okay, ocotillo is another really prominent plant in the low areas of the valleys of Anza-Borrego. Fucaria splendens. It's restricted to the warm areas below 3,000 feet, so you won't find it at higher elevations in the park. It really does like it warm and hot. It's very well adapted to the hot conditions and limited rainfall on the desert floor. Oftentimes, most of the year, you will see it just looks like a bundle of sticks, but within 48 hours of a rain, you'll start to see leaves come out. So it's pretty spectacular response time to a limited amount of rain. The spines are actually derived from the old petioles from the previous leaves. So I thought that was kind of an interesting kind of tidbit with ocotillo as well. This was commonly used for building and fences. When it rains, it'll grow. You could propagate this from cuttings very easily. And it's got spectacular blooms. It's the only plant in this family in California. The other nice thing is it's designated dark skies in Anza-Borrego, so there's no light pollution. The only light pollution you see coming in from the background there would be the moonrise. So very great place to stargaze if you're into astronomy. This is a wonderful place. They oftentimes have once a week a group that goes out, and you can get involved to if you're interested in astronomy. So this was actually taken on my last trip. This was under the full moon in the desert wash. So the full moon is a spectacular time to be there because it's pretty much walking around like in the middle of the day. It's so bright out. There's nothing to restrict that light, and it's this was actually during I think they call it a super moon, so it was extremely bright out. But it's spectacular night.
Spell that red flower plant's name.
Ocotillo is Ocotillo. 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 No A's, all O's. I believe. I hope I'm right on that.
Someone typed it in, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so the desert washes is what I wanted to lead into because this is a really great place to start looking at. I kind of wanted to cover the kind of most prevalent trees and shrubs and cacti in the park, but I wanted to get into some of the flowers. And oftentimes, if you're looking for flowers, the desert washes are the great place to start looking for flowers. just starting to walk up and down the washes, you're going to start to see a lot of diversity. And one of those is the brittle bush, which is Encilia farinosa, and it's a very common shrub throughout the park. It's called brittle bush because it is very brittle. It actually the flowering stem just breaks very cleanly when you're out in the field. So it's very brittle. All the stalks are very brittle, so that's how it has its name. So it's oftentimes very tolerant of high temperatures and drought. So you'll find this growing in very hot, rocky, south-facing slopes, and it blooms multiple times a year whenever the humidity and temperature is just right. You'll find flowers, plants, Encilia flowering. This particular species is there's another Encilia called Actins Encilia. Actins just has a single stalk with a single flower at the top. The farinosa is actually multi-stalk stem, so there's usually somewhere between 8 and 12 flowers coming off of each flowering stalk. And this plant is also, it'll drop its leaves. A lot of these plants are just, they look dead in the during times of drought. So this plant will drop all its leaves during drought as well. So it's also allelopathic, which it means it puts out a chemical. And so it helps with competing plants, so resources. It puts out a chemical that inhibits seed germination of plants close to it. So it can help compete with resources with other plants around it when especially resources are very limited. This is the lupine. You probably all recognize this one. This is the Arizona lupine, Lupinus arizonicus. It's the pea family. And there's actually several species, but this is the most common lupine in the Sonoran Desert is the Arizona lupine. The Palafoxia, which is the Spanish needle. It's another really common one that you'll find growing in the washes quite often after a rain. It's got the exerted stamens and should be, I believe, in the Asteraceae family just by looking at it. It's basically an annual that just comes up after the rain. So very sparsely foliated. The leaves are very linear and thin, so it doesn't lose a lot of its water, but the flowers are just spectacular when you can look up close. This was named after a Spanish general who was traveling through this area in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And this common name, again, is Spanish needles. Cinchweed is one that actually is also a monsoonal bloom. So after the rains, both in July, August, and in the wintertime, you'll find this one blooming almost half the year. It's a very widespread a plant. It's actually, this is one of the few plants that actually that grows in Anza-Borrego that can be found in all the 4 major deserts of North America. So this can be found in the Mojave, the Sonoran, the Chihuahuan, and the Great Basin Desert. So it's got a very wide distributed range, but another one that grows, it's very tiny. This, as you can see by my finger, it rarely grows above 6 inches tall. This is called fanleaf Tequilia. This is Tequilia plicata. I think the biggest one, it oftentimes grows in disturbed areas, so you'll see this along roadsides and places where you might end up camping. It's oftentimes it's a prostrate plant. Again, only grows a few inches off the ground, and obviously the major characteristic of getting to know this plant are the deeply grooves in the leaves themselves. Kind of reminds me of like our local mahogany, where it stands out with those deeply grooved veination in the leaves. I've actually never seen this one bloom, but it's a very common low-growing plant that you'll find. This is another one too, called trailing windmills, Alonia incarnata. It's another one that will only grow just a few feet off the desert floor. It's in the 4 o'clock family, if anybody recognizes the inflorescence on that. And Again, all these plants are going to be very hairy. It protects them from the wind, from water loss. It helps cool the stem tissue, the leaf tissue. But these hairs also grab onto a lot of sand particles when you're looking up close. This is a very common shrub that also grows in the washes. This is chuparosa. Chuparosa means hummingbird in Spanish. And obviously you can tell by the deep-throated inflorescence that the nectar is way down in there. So it's a perfect fit. You almost always, when I'm standing next to this plant and just waiting for a few minutes, you'll see a hummingbird come by. It's a great place to see local hummingbirds and activity. It's quite frequent in the washes. Um, and it's a shrub that'll grow up to 4 or 5 feet tall. So it's actually quite tall at maturity. Another common one is the primroses, the evening primroses. This one, and I'll go over the 3 main ones in the park. This is called the brown-eyed evening primrose. And this one is oftentimes, again, associated with rain. Again, I'll see this plant almost. The only year that I was there was last year, 2024 was a very dry year, so I didn't see as many flowers as I normally would see, but I would still see the primroses. They would still bloom even in times of drought, even just with a little bit of moisture in the air. So the primroses, evening primroses are Onagraceae family, so oftentimes Onagraceae is known by having 4 petals, and it's not apparent on this one, but oftentimes at the tip of those 4 petals, there's a deep notch at the end of the petals, signifying the plant family Onagraceae. Here's the other primrose that you oftentimes see, which is Oenothera californica. And there's actually one more that's very common that grows out in the dunes. It's called the dune primrose. We'll look at that one towards the end. But the main difference between, it kind of looks like the dune primrose, but this white evening primrose actually has a flower that's 3 inches or less. And it's kind of known by its drooping buds. Everything kind of hangs, all the flower buds kind of hang down in front of the flower like that. So those are some morphological features to look at when you're looking at that. Obviously, the brown-eyed evening primrose is that color deep in the throat of the corolla there that you can see that signifies that species. It's very unique in that way. Notchleaf Phacelia. This is in the borage family. And as you can see, some of the, like in the lower corner there, the borage family has a scorpioid cyme oftentimes. So a good way to get to know our Phacelias or Aboriginaceae family is when you start to see the flowers coming out here in the spring, that scorpion tail kind of inflorescence where the flowers kind of open at the base and it curls open like that and the flowers just go towards the tip. Phacelia, just like our local Phacelias, often are very hairy. If you touch this plant, you have sensitive skin, you can get a rash from handling this plant or even touching it. So it's best just to observe it with a camera or from a distance. But nonetheless, a very important plant. I guess I should mention that, the other part to this and that you can really kind of learn about when you're in this park is not just the plants, but the pollinators. Phacelia with his exerted pollen is a great place to see a lot of pollinators coming by throughout the day. This is another one called Canterbury Bells. It's the same thing. You can see that scorpioid cyme as a signal of Aboriginaceae. Getting into the washes, this is a smoke tree. This is a small shrub or tree that grows 20 feet or less. It's very common in the washes. It's probably the most common tree or shrub as you're walking along the washes. It oftentimes is leafless. It does not have leaves at all most of the year. And it has this blue-greenish kind of appearance from afar. It has very sharp spines. And again, very important nesting site for a lot of the birds that are down in the washes. I think one of the more interesting things of this plant are are the seed pods that have this kind of little resin kind of glands on the seed pods after it blooms. It's actually a legume, so it does fix nitrogen, and it's yeah, it's in the pea family, so it's got little pea pods, but these resinous glands are are very stickler. They're very sticky and they're aromatic too. I'm not sure if that's maybe an adaptation to invite birds to come along and eat the seed to for dispersal. That's another common species in the washes is the cat's claw, and it's got the recurved spine. Another uh, in the legume family as well, in the pea family, and yeah, this one always causes trouble when you're hiking around because it's also called wait a minute bush because it usually have to back up and go get your hat or your shirt or something it grabs onto. It's very good at grabbing onto clothing and of the like. But again, it's a very small shrub. Most of the trees, if they do have leaves in the park, are these very reduced compound leaves with very limited surface area for water loss. This is Senegalia greggii, and again, a lot of the identification of trees and shrubs, because a lot of them don't have leaves, you oftentimes will be looking at the spines to identify these trees when you're in the park. So another one that has, you can see in the bottom right there, not a recurved spine, but just a straight needle-like spine, is the mesquite. It's a high protein. It produces high protein bean pods, another important food source for the folks that lived in this area historically for a long time. Besides the agave, the mesquite was a very rich source of protein as well. Another shrub that you'll find in this area is the desert lavender. It's, again, one of my, probably besides creosote, one of my favorite aromatics. It's got a very strong smell. It's in the mint family. It oftentimes grows in washes, small ravines. Again, very highly aromatic shrub and very tolerant. The year I was there, where they were going through a long period of drought for almost a year without very little rain, coming out of a hot summer into a dry winter, which was, I believe, the winter of 2024. This was one of the few plants that was blooming and growing profusely, so it had a lot of bee pollination, a lot of bee activity, even in the driest periods of drought.
What's that one?
Desert lavender. It's in the mint family. This is actually a milkweed. It's there's several. There's 3 species of milkweeds that grow in there. This is Asclepias subulate, which is the rush milkweed. It actually doesn't produce any leaves. It just photosynthesizes through its stem and produces flowers, but it has no leaves on it. So again, little to no reduced leaves is an adaptation for adapting to water loss. This is actually in the spurge family. This is called rattlesnake weed. It's a low-growing spurge. It's very common after rains to cover the the bottom of the washes. You oftentimes see it growing and blowing profusely. Lots of very tiny little flowers. This one is very hard to photograph, but almost as much flowers as stem and leaf tissue when it does bloom. So very advantageous to when it does come out. Very short-lived. You can imagine that after a rain, a lot of these plants really will produce leaves, flower, go to seed in a matter of weeks before they're done till the next season. I believe this is actually a perennial, though, so it will come back after it rains. This is white Rotania. Chromaria is the genus on this one, bicolor. It's another one that has kind of an interesting seed pod, obviously very thorny to protect it from herbivory. It also, the thorns help disperse the seed. We call that zoochory, so it's an adaptation that plants use to stick themselves onto the fur of animals so it can take a ride and get dispersed further out. There's hydrochory, which plants will float on the water, and ballichory, where plants shoot out of a plant. But zoochory is an interesting dispersal method that plants have associated with animals to help them disperse their seed so they can spread the population out over a further range. This is a semi-parasitic shrub, so it actually will connect to the roots of other plants around it, but it can photosynthesize too, so it's semi-parasitic shrub as well. This is a Solanaceae facilis, which is ground cherry. It'll actually produce little husk ground cherries that are just like the ground cherries that you might grow in your garden. You probably recognize Solanaceae by the 5 united petals and the 5 united sepals, which are the leaves that subtend the petals. And this one also grows it's quite widespread throughout the park in the winter months when they do get the rains. A lot of pincushion flowers as well in the park. This is the pebble pincushion. This is chia, which is another in a salvia, which is the mint family. Very important food source as well. The seeds, chia seeds. It's very prolific. I didn't do it justice by just taking this photo because I think I have another photo where it oftentimes grows in huge abundant populations where you might see upwards of a quarter acre of just chia going to seed. It's very prolific, spreading by seed, and it's in the mint family as well. Cryptantha, there's a lot of species that I haven't identified yet, but you'll oftentimes find quite a bit of those also grow. Yeah, so the desert isn't just full of rocks and dry soil. It oftentimes is very spectacular. This is an area of the park that's called Coyote Canyon. It's the biggest riparian area inside the park. So this is a great place to see a lot of flowering plants in the winter time. It's an area that you can only enter by foot, but it's a spectacular area to, oftentimes if you're interested, a lot of people like to try to see the bighorn sheep that live inside the park. And this is oftentimes where they will have their babies, and you'll see young baby sheep being born in the early spring months because of the abundant water source. Also along that area is bladderpod is something that if you haven't seen this plant, it grows all the way from the coast of California into the desert regions. This is actually a subspecies. Once it gets to the desert, the plants, bladderpod, the ones along the coast, if you're familiar with Southern California flora, the bladderpods are very round. In the desert, they become more elongated and linear, but they're the same species, just a subspecies. Another one that grows in the washes is the datura. There's 2 species of it. This is called Jimson weed, which is the larger of the 2. This is Datura wrighti. There's a smaller datura called Datura discolor, which actually discolor has a smaller flower and a purple throat. This one is just a pure white flower. I guess that inside of the flower is really popping out, but there's no coloration inside, and it's I would say the average width of the flowers are somewhere around 4 to 6 inches wide, so it's very prevalent. Getting up into the higher elevations, one reason I love to take desert plants photographs is they're very easy to photograph compared to Oregon, where they're like this one I think was like a family portrait or something, of everybody growing up. This is the hedgehog cactus, and this was at the higher elevations. You can see the town of Borrego Springs below me and the valley floor. This is growing upwards of 4,000 to 5,000 feet in elevation, and gosh, just look at the ability to grow just out of pure rock like that. I mean, no soil, 110, 120 degrees for several months in the summertime. Limited rainfall, 10 inches or less of rain throughout most of the park, and these plants are just thriving. So, really spectacular species. This is called the hedgehog species. Hedgehog cacti. It oftentimes grows in multi-stems. It's called hedgehog because if you look at the spines, they oftentimes have a light and a dark color, kind of like hedgehogs have spines that are 2 different colors as well. So, at the higher elevations, you get into some deciduous. This is actually a wild desert apricot. It does produce fruit. And I haven't actually been up into the park when it's fruiting, but it's very, I guess, I kind of do it around the ways of prunus just because of the leaf and the shape of the plant. There's actually a wild plum that grows in the higher elevations of the plant as well. Lots of aragoniums that are growing up at the top. The buckwheats like the dry rocky outcropping as well. This is Aragonium fasciculatum, which is oftentimes a good place to see a lot of the native butterflies pollinating buckwheats. This is actually a native mallow, apricot mallow. This doesn't produce apricots, but it's the Malvaceae family. It's got a really pleasant leaf, and again, just look at the just the hairy leathery skin that really helps help it adapt to the wind and the drought conditions. That's kind of the overarching theme of a lot of these plants are just really densely pubescent hairs on the stem and the leaves of the plant. This is a rhamnus that grows at the higher elevation, evergreen shrub that grows down the southern. This is the coyote melon. It's a perennial vine. I actually brought one with me today. He wants to come take a look at it later. It's not it's not like a sugary melon, but it's one that definitely caught my eye. The leaves are like sandpaper, and it produces these fruits, and they just grow out of the middle of just pure rock. They grow in some of the most desolate, harshest environments, both in the Mojave and the Sonoran Desert. And they just seem to love it. They just start to break out of the ground in the spring, and they'll put on 10 feet of growth and produce these lush melons. Supposedly, coyotes do eat them. I hardly see even animals touching them. I've read that it's a starvation food, so it could be edible, but it's extremely bitter as well. It has a very large tuber that helps sustain it through periods of drought because it is a perennial that stays dormant through most of the year until the conditions are right. I do want to point out just the white sage, Salvia apiana, and some Dudleyi. These are, again, these are plants that typically are succulents, or the white sage that just grow in these small isolated populations, but they're, white sage is used as a smudge or incense, and so it's oftentimes at risk of being over harvested. Same with the Dudleyi's; they're oftentimes prized by collectors and over harvested, and they're very limited in their population. So there are these kind of rare plants growing in these environments too that need protection. And this is another little cacti that grows up there. You can't quite tell from here, but it is about the size of half a lighter. So it's a tiny little plant. It's called the pincushion cactus. It's one of my favorite. It doesn't get any bigger than that. That's its total size at maturity. And they just live in these little rock crevices, and they just thrive in there. That's the pincushion. And then, of course, at the higher elevations too, we've got California junipers. They grow above 2,500 feet. This dioecious as well, so the female plants are easier to identify when they have their blueberry-like berries that come on. Mormon tea, ephedra, is another one that grows up in this area. Of course, ephedrine was extracted from this plant. It was drinking as a tea by both Native Americans and early European settlers as kind of a stimulant. And it's got other properties as well, I'm sure. But there's actually 6 different species. The interesting thing about the ephedra is it's a gymnosperm, so it's not related to angiosperms in any way. Those look like flowers, but those are, well, actually, I hope that's correct there, because ephedra really doesn't produce flowers. They produce little cones. They're very leathery as well, but they kind of have these kind of jointed. They're called joint firs. So oftentimes you'll see them multi-jointed where the stems are growing out of. This is just something, just a PSA. I don't know what's going on, but a lot of these balloons are. I'm like, this is just one trip that I took in 1 week in December, and I came across a lot of these balloons are showing up everywhere. I don't know what the deal is. They must never biodegrade, but They are, and I've heard other botanists that actually work in the Mojave Desert, the desert regions, that this is a thing. So I'm not sure if people just let them go and they fly out, they land in these desert regions. But I was surprised. I found these three balloons in 4 days in the desert. So there's obviously something going on here with that as well. Not that I'm going to start a campaign against it, but I thought it was just interesting. Getting through this, I want to kind of wrap it up. There is also another really great environment in the park, which is the palm oasis, which has the only native palm tree to California, which is the Washingtonia foliifera. It's a relic species, which means that it showed up a long time ago when the climate was much wetter, but it basically signals water in the desert. It needs year-round water, so when you find these palm oases in the park, you will find water, and you'll find a lot of other wildlife around there because of the water. It doesn't shed its leaves, so you can see it kind of forms a skirt, and that's an adaptation to fire. It's a fire-adapted species because it's not a hardwood tree. Palms, it's got water all the way out to its outer cuticle. It can withstand fires quite readily. So the seeds are fire-dependent germinators. So again, all that dry brush and material oftentimes can help with ground fires, help clear out the bottom layer competition of plants, and it will help the seeds to germinate so it can continue to propagate itself. And of course, it's just a nice place to actually go and be by some creek water and springs. There's several palm oases throughout the park. Some are easy to get to, some you have to hike in several miles. So Anza-Borrego comes from Juan Batiste de Anza, and he was one of the first kind of European explorers. It's hard to see on his route, but he came up through the Baja area and came into the Anza-Borrego area and actually settled colonies inside the park. This was one that I hiked out to. It was about a 5 mile hike to get there. There was no easy way or roads, but this was actually an old Spanish colony that they actually brought livestock and tried to settle there. I don't think they lasted very long, but the palm trees signify there is quite a bit of water. It's hard to see, but there's actually quite a bit of mesquite growing in this area too. And there's actually a fairly large uh, creek system, water riparian area all through here. So obviously an area that was enticing after crossing through. This is the town of Borrego Springs. This is on the left. It's called Christmas Circle. It's the only place to get internet. So if your phone doesn't work, or if you got, sometimes you have to drive 45 minutes to go to the central area of the park just to, if you want to get emails or make phone calls. It's gotten a little better, but it just depends on where you're camping. But if you're going up desert washes or up these canyons, you're probably not going to get. I usually don't get cell phone coverage or internet, which I kind of prefer. But oftentimes, if you've got to go into town, it's just a one road town, literally. It's got some great little stores and shops along there, and a nice little green patch for farmers markets and things. And it's got some public restrooms there, which are nice once in a while if you're camping for a long time to use the public restroom as well. And maybe it. And there's a lot of culture in the town. There's an art park, which is great. There's an art institute. There's a wonderful library that's open to the public. There's some great old missionary churches just within a few blocks walking around town. And there's a botanic garden where you can see even stranger species like this pinecone cactus or this leafless. There's actually a little botanic garden that you can go visit right in the middle of town to learn about some of the plants before you go off into the desert. And they have signage, and you can. I like to go to botanic gardens before I head out into an area. There's a lot of pictographs and areas where morteros, where the agave was used and processed. You can find kind of a lot of old relics of people that lived there really not that long ago. Just we're talking 150, 200 years ago, where thriving villages out in this park, especially the agave. You can see that it likely was, between the agave and some of the buckwheat and I have to assume when I'm in some of these areas that some of this was tended to almost like a garden would be tended to, because you get into some of these areas where you find these uh, paintings and pictographs, or these areas where agave was being processed, and you just see nothing but agave for 4 or 5 acres of just agave. So, whether or not they were purposely propagating it or growing it, it's almost like in an early agricultural type system. Uh, Seems to be evidence of that. This is kind of an interesting story. If you're in this area of the park itself, Ghost Mountain, this is the remains of a family that lived there for 10 years in the 1930s to the 1940s. There's a picture of the gentleman. He was an author. He started a magazine called Desert Magazine. He was the kind of the first person to really talk about and write about the Sonoran Desert, this part of the country. But he also lived a pretty rough, primitive lifestyle. That was his old homestead on top of Ghost Mountain. You can still go visit the park today. It's like an hour walk to the top, and they used the junipers for firewood. They have a food stove. They tried to live as primitively, as simply as possible, but they also, I'm sure, uh, didn't live completely off the land like the indigenous people had. But it was an interesting experiment that I don't think ended well. For no one passed away or anything or died, but I just don't think the families ended up, um, really staying in the area for much longer after the 10-year experiment at Ghost Mountain. Interesting area, beautiful area to nice vistas. And then, of course, what everybody goes for, I think, is the dunes. The monsoonal rains, the winter rains bring out what's the sand verbena, which is a Bronia villosa, and this is a very popular. This brings in a lot of visitors when this plant's in full bloom. It usually blooms for anywhere between 3 and 4 weeks, and at the height, it just covers the sandy floor of the park. It's the hairy sand verbena. Of course, it's very prostate. Um, the interesting thing is it actually has opposite leaves, but each leaf is one's big and one's small. So it's kind of uncommon with plants with opposite leaves to have a large and a small leaf on opposite ends of each other. But obviously, the most spectacular thing is just how it survives. I mean, that's actually buds that haven't opened yet. You can see some early flowers starting to open, and just the amount of wind and sand that it gets pummeled with, and that it can produce something as beautiful as that, after the rains come. So this is our other species of Oenothera. This is the dune primrose. It's often paired in these areas. I think the word now is super bloom, where people go out and like to see these areas in the park. There's a couple areas like Henderson Canyon and June Wash that are oftentimes known for these big, multi-acre blooms of mostly just a few species, really. But it's oftentimes the dune primrose, the sand verbena, and the desert sunflower, which is pictured here as well. Okay, barrel cactus is another one that I haven't talked about. Don't drink if you're looking for surviving in the desert. Don't drink the barrel cactus water. It's too alkaline. You'll perish. There's not drinking water for human use inside there. It's a myth. Yeah, it was also called miner's compass because oftentimes the barrel cactus lean to the south when they grow. So in times of you don't have a compass, people that were traveling overland would oftentimes use the barrel cactuses to find where south would be. So it's another one that is somewhat threatened because collectors like to use it in landscapes, and the ones that are in this picture that are 4 or 5 feet tall, it takes several hundred years, 100 years to get to that size. So it's not like you can just grow these from seed and get to a plant of that size, but they are getting harvested by people to be used in landscapes and horticulture. It's another nice variety. This is the desert trumpet, which is the Aragonium, another one inflatum. This is Emery's rock cress. It grows. It was blooming a lot after the rains. I was there in December. It was the most prevalent wildflower. It was all over the park when I was there. And don't forget, there's a lot of other things besides plants. There's great lichens. There's coffee fern that I found. There's different types of really hardy ferns that grow there. So it's not just, there's mosses, there's liverworts, there's fungi. So yeah, and there's a lot of wildlife to see. There's a lot of animals that obviously burrow underground that you can identify. If you don't identify them by night, I've actually got a book called The Holes of the Desert where you can actually identify what the animal is by the shape and size and diameter of the hole. A rounded one like this, I don't think it is, but oftentimes if you see a U-shaped one, you'll see the desert tortoise lives underground, which is very unique one to see. So it's again a 12, 13-hour drive to get there. I usually stop somewhere halfway in between, and then for my second day, I make it down there and spend about a week. It's all dispersed camping. It's all free. You don't need a permit. You don't need a pass for now, as long as people respect the park and keep it clean. It seems like, again, the reason why I want to highlight this park is because it seems like it's really a place to go. It's a botanical destination. The flowers are spectacular. The flora is spectacular. And it's the largest state park in California. So it's a really great place to just spread out and kind of find your own little spot off these desert roads. Please do stay on the roads when you're traveling in there. Oftentimes you have to deflate your tires to get over some of the sand. But they're fairly easy to drive across, and it's a great place to camp. And again, when you're driving through there, remember to just take it slow, because just when you get out of the park, there's the Mojave National Preserve is just to the north. It's about a 2-3 hour drive. This is another great park. There's lava tubes. There's some historical buildings there, and it's right adjacent to Joshua Tree. So within a 2-hour driving radius, you can see other national monuments and a lot of other species too. So and just remember, there's and there's just a lot of openness, and don't get abducted, I guess, by aliens when you're out in the desert. And yeah, this is a tumbleweed. If you've never seen one up close, when this dries out, you're probably used to when you see these going across the desert. I did come across a desert tortoise, which was really a treat to see. It's a really special, I believe it's a threatened species, it's endangered at this point. This was crossing the road when I was driving, and really spectacular to see as well. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I'd say just I brought my son there when he was 18 years old, and it was a great trip for him. When in 2020, we were there right at the beginning of COVID. We were kind of like, should we just stay down here, because it was a perfect place to be during the pandemic. But it's a place of endless curiosity. I brought some great books. Like I said, there's endless amounts of plant life to explore. It's a great community. There's a lot of culture, and it's a really remote area that's within driving distance. That's a great winter getaway. So hopefully it's inspired you to get down to the park and enjoy some of the flowers. And you can go back to this presentation and maybe look at some of the notes that I put in here to help you identify some of the plants that are growing down there. But I've only tip of the iceberg. I've got 300 more photos that I don't have time to share on Flora. So, yeah, thank you. And please come up and encourage you to take a look at. I have a lot of books that I've acquired over time that have been really helpful for me to identify plants in this area. I don't know if there's any questions that I can help answer.
Those close-ups.
Oh, just with my cell phone. I don't know. I just real still, and I just zoom in and take it real slow. But obviously, a lot of desert plants have really small features, and it's important that you have a camera that you can get those close-up photos with. Yes.
So regarding the Bronia there,
Mhm.
I've heard, and I wonder if anybody in the room actually would know that
Yeah.
it's the same genus and species of Bronia that occurs other than Central California. Is that correct? It is.
I don't know. I know Abronia. We have you're not talking about Oregon. You're talking about California, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
California.
I I don't know. I'm not
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
There is a yellow.
I've seen yellow, yeah,
Both places too.
so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are the Zoomers, that's what the or see what the question was.
Oh, we had a question in the room about Abronia villosa, which is the sand verbena, if it actually grows on the coast of California as well. I don't know the answer to that specifically, but again, the amazing thing about Anza-Borrego is you are just an hour and a half to 2 hours from the ocean. So there is a lot of crossover plants that will make it over, I believe it's the San Gabriel mountain range into the park, but I'm not sure if that is one of them. So sorry. Okay.
Um, so someone asked kind of early on in your talk, do different plants flower during winter months as opposed to during the monsoonal period?
Yes, there are plants, and if you start to look up the vegetation, there's groups of plants that are called monsoonal plants, and those are plants that specifically are tied to the summer monsoon. So that would be July, August. A lot of the plants I showed today are going to bloom during the monsoons, but they're also going to bloom during the winter rains too. They're just going to bloom whenever there's rain as well. All my photos were taken during the winter months, but there are specific ones that, again, will be just July, August. Those are called monsoonal plants. Mhm.
Okay. There's another question. There's a lot of people talking about what washes are, but people are chiming in who've been there.
Yeah,
There's been quite a
good,
number of visitors and sharing stuff about camping
good,
and
excellent.
I'm not gonna repeat everything, but that's for the Zoomers. Um, but there was a question about the tall stalk.
Agave?
Any idea why such a tall stalk on the agave flower? What is the seed dispersal?
Oh,
What is that?
oh, I don't know. Like I said, I like to think that because they are mostly. Well, I don't know if this makes sense. I don't really want to try to answer that. Bats, birds, maybe higher up.
The world's biggest
Yeah.
asparagus.
That the only thing I could think of is, the seed pods are edible, and so maybe having it further off the ground helps protect it from the seed just being eaten by animals. That's the only thing I could think of. So, when I see seed up in the higher parts of plants, it's probably just trying to protect itself from getting eaten over all those years.
Or wants a dinosaur to eat it.
Yeah, right. That could be it too. Yeah, great questions. But
Yeah. And people are just thanking you and you're so knowledgeable.
oh, appreciate that.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, thanks for letting me share.
To visit, someone did answer it, but you could say your opinion of best time to visit.
Yeah, I would say late January through mid-March, end of March, if you're now, right? So that's kind of why I did the talk. I would say just because the temperatures are very agreeable, and the blooms, if you're going to see flowers, then it's the spring is early there. Usually, spring is over. The spring bloom ends by mid-April, end of April, so much earlier than here. But yeah, I would say February, March are the best months.
Is there any high elevation compared to 5,000? You mentioned 5,000. How high did you get?
Yeah, there's Village Peak and Whale Peak. Village Peak is the largest peak in the park. I don't quote me on this, but I want to say it's around 8 to 9,000 feet tall. So it's quite it's 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 one I haven't done because it's very difficult to get to, but it's the highest peak inside the park. Yeah, good question. Yes.
I was there last, this around New Year's for a wedding
Mm-hmm.
at the botanical garden. There was a sign about hot springs, and nobody seems knowing
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
there are no.
Yeah, so in the very south eastern corner of the park, it's actually San Diego. It's owned by the county of San Diego, and it's called Agua Caliente. And there's three pools. They're not real hot, but they range from 90 to maybe 100 1 or 102, and there's camping there. It's not primitive. They have even cabins you can rent, and if you have an RV, you can plug in, and they don't have good internet there. I can vouch for that. But it's yeah, they have a little general store, and the pool's open, and it's nice. It's a swimming pool. It's not, they're like swimming pools. There's two that are outside and one that's inside. That's the warm one. So we usually like to end our trip there because it's just nice after a week of hiking to sit in some nice hot mineral water. But yeah, there's other hot springs around Palm Springs and outside the park, but that one is right on the edge of the park before you get out to Interstate 8, which is the interstate that goes between Arizona and San Diego. So,
And if
yeah,
you're an Oregonian, it's clothing required.
yes, exactly. Yeah, great question. Right.
Well, in Oregon,
Yeah, that's clothing required at this one. So yeah,
compared to Oregon.
yeah, yeah. No, and there's some great hikes in that corner of the park too. Yeah, there's Moonlight Canyon that Darlene likes is inside that park, and there's a palm wash right up the road that I like to camp at. And that where I showed you the sand verbena and the evening primrose is really close. It's within 10 minutes of where the hot springs are. It's called June Wash. June Wash, like the month of June. Yes. Any other questions? All right, well, it's fun to take you along on a trip. I usually just do this solo or with my son or my wife, but it was fun to take everyone else along.